Hi, beloved daughters of the King. Welcome back to Women Warriors of the Word and today's 5-ish minutes of faith. I want to share something with you out of Matthew chapter 14, and it's in verses, where is it? Here it is, verse 27. Okay, so this is to give you some backstory. Jesus had just fed the 5,000. John the Baptist had been beheaded. Then Jesus goes and he feeds the 5,000. Then he sends the disciples on a boat across the lake, and he goes to the side of the mountain to pray. Then Jesus goes out to the disciples who are on the boat, and there's some really high winds kicking around. And so the disciples are in the boat with all these winds around them. And then Jesus tells them in verse 27, he says, immediately he said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Then in verse 28, Peter cries out and says, Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you out upon the water. In verse 29, Jesus says, come. Then listen to this. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. Verse 30, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Verse 31, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? Now, I'm sure many of you have heard this scripture before, and if you haven't, it's a great one. There's a lot of teachings on it. But what captured me was this question: how far away from Jesus was Peter when he took his eyes off of him? Because when Peter's on the boat, he's calling out in faith, hey, Lord, if it's you, call me out on the water. And Peter gets out of the boat and starts walking on water. Then he realizes the winds. Then he loses faith, and immediately Jesus is there. Now, I'm thinking that if Peter was like in an arm's reach of Jesus, he wouldn't be paying attention to everything else around him. I'm thinking Jesus was kind of far away, and then Peter began to realize the repercussions of his step of faith. How many of us take a step of faith and then are like, whoa, this isn't really what I was expecting? And we start looking at the circumstances around us. How many of us have gotten out of the boat, taken the step of faith, we begin to experience the miracle, and then we start focusing on the problems? But here's what really caught me, daughters of the King. Jesus was there immediately. And I don't think for a second that they were an arm's length away. If Peter was an arm's length away from Jesus, he's right there. Like if someone is right in front of you that you can reach out and hold their hand, you're not really paying attention to what's going on around you. They're right in front of your face. But Jesus closed the gap and was immediately right there to pick up Peter. But what did Peter have to do? He had to call out, Lord, save me. See, that step of faith sometimes leads us into a place where we feel like Jesus is so far away. I took this step and Lord, where did you go? I obeyed what your word says, and now my life is full of strong winds and turmoil. Where'd you go? All I'm looking at is the reality of my situation. But Jesus's response to us is always the same as it was for Peter. When Peter called out, the word says immediately, Jesus took his hand. Immediately, Jesus responded to Peter's cry for help. In faith, do we cry out in faith for Jesus to come, to grab our hand, to pull us back out of doubt? Or do we cower in doubt and stay focused on the right or the left? I want to encourage you, daughters, that no matter where you find yourself, whether it's in the act of faith and now you're like, how did I get here? What's going on? This isn't what I was expecting. Or if you have backslidden and are so far from God that he seems as if he is on the other side of the lake. The truth that we get from this scripture is that when we cry out, Jesus responds. but we have to cry out in faith. And then we have to take his hand. What if Peter never took Jesus's hand? It doesn't say that Jesus grabbed him by the forearm and pulled him out. It doesn't say that Jesus picked him up by his armpits. He grabbed his hand, which means Peter had to grab his hand. So daughters, grab the hand of Jesus and let him pull you out of doubt and into deeper faith. Until next time, be a faith walker, not just a faith talker.